getting to the real pointy, interesting end of the process today, all about how to pass the interview. Hopefully what we did with looking at resumes and cover letters and helping you apply for jobs and getting a professional LinkedIn profile is going to help you actually start to get some interviews. The first step will actually, we haven't quite covered it, and I don't think it's necessarily covered in the slideshow, is the first step might be a phone call. So we're focused in the presentation here, I think, more on the face-to-face interviews, or it might be an online video interview. But quite often, the first step you might get is just a quick phone call, like what they call a screening phone call, just to check things like your availability and your salary expectations. We'll cover some of these questions in today's session. But just so you're aware of that, if you haven't been through this process, you're still a student and you're not sure, very often that the first thing you'll find out about it is a phone call from maybe a recruiter or from someone in HR or talent acquisition in the organization, just they're trying to basically filter down maybe the 15 or 20 people that they've shortlisted for interview. So one way that they can just get down maybe to the 5 people they actually want to meet face to face is to phone you up and have a quick chat with you, because that'll usually help quickly identify some people they can just reject. So they can get down to 5 people who they will sit down face to face with and spend that time on.
Fantastic. While we wait, just give it a couple of minutes. We've got a few people here already. I hope, Alex, hopefully your audio is working now. What if we do something interesting and just start off by using the chat box here, guys? Let's everyone put in what you think is the hardest interview question either you've ever had or that you think. And then we'll review the answer. We'll review the questions and we'll try and tackle them at the end. Or we might just put our top 3 questions and let's see if there's an interview question that even Langdon and I don't know how to answer. So yeah, feel free. We'll give you guys a couple of minutes. Let's just do a bit of a warm-up activity. If you can use the chat box and type in what you think is the hardest interview question that you've had or that you fear that you're going to get in your next interview. There's hundreds of interview questions. What would be the hardest?
Worst feature? I've always thought it was my nose.
What is your worst feature? Yep.
That's similar to the what is your biggest weakness?
I hope no one asks that in an interview, Paul.
Much dreaded one.
That would be pretty annoying if someone said, what is your worst feature?
It sounds like you're describing a physical feature. Yeah. Okay, the expected salary one is very common. What would you have done differently? Yes, that's also had a client who was asked that in an interview very recently. Tell us about a project you did and what you would do differently if you had your time to do it again. Why did you quit your last job? Yeah, that can be awkward, especially if there was something there that you don't want to talk about. Okay, Paul, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, biggest weakness.
Matthew, that's a really good one. Questions about your past work that's confidential. And we can run into the same problems on resumes as well. I think, Langdon, we've had a few cases where on the CV, on the resume, they weren't able to talk about the projects, the clients, the achievements. So it becomes a bit interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Why are you leaving your current position? Yep. Why do you want to leave your current position is often how that's framed.
Yeah. Got a couple of minutes, guys. Feel free to put in any other tough questions you think. One of the questions I've struggled with in interviews is if they ask you about a skill or if you have experience in something where you don't. That's really tough. it's hard to work around, because the worst thing you can do is say, no, I don't. And the hardest part is to, within literally 10 to 15 seconds, identify something that you've done that's similar, or something that's transferable, where you can explain to them that you roughly know what it is, you've done something similar. It might be a different software system, might be a different methodology, but you've got no issues in picking it up quickly.
Well, this is where the preparation and homework really comes in, because ideally you'll have those answers ready beforehand, because you're likely to know what they're going to be asking about from the job description or position description. So we'll cover that shortly. I think it's about 6 past.
Yep.
We might start heading through now. And what do you think?
Yep. Great. So let's.
So Hannah's just written scenario questions. Yes. Right. Okay. Good. So we'll circle back to these, and some of these will come up. We've got them in the slideshow already, so we'll cover some of these in our presentation, and maybe we can come back and talk about other ones at the end. All right. Now, you're starting off?
Yeah. So guys, today we've got just a bit under 2 hours to do a few different activities around interview preparation, interview training. So we'll cover off, the best ways to research and get ready. And then we'll talk about the 3 main types of interview questions. We'll also cover off what I call the opening pitch, which is, tell us a bit about yourself, like the icebreaker question, which is probably not being asked as often as it once was. We will talk you through the structure of an answer. There's obviously the STAR methodology, but Langdon and I have our own sort of structure, which is pretty similar. Cover off some things about the performance on the day and questions at the end. And throughout the presentation, guys, we might ask for a couple of volunteers. So I might call upon maybe 2 volunteers, one, or maybe a couple. But if you feel bold and you want to switch on your camera and audio, Langdon and I will be more than happy to do a 5 to 7 minute blitz mock interview with you. And then at the end of that, we can give you some feedback as well. So we'll do that a bit after our break, maybe at around 12:15. We'll do a mock interview with a volunteer. So let's get
started. Maybe a few volunteers, actually. Yeah, I think there's really value in that. So once we blitz through the slideshow, then actually just seeing different people provide answers and then hearing the feedback we give on how they can improve is going to be really make a lot of sense of what we go through in the slideshow.
Cool. Okay, Langdon, do you want to take over?
Well, this was just, basically to make sure, when we talk about interview questions and so on, that we're talking about the types of roles that you're applying for. So if you want to just put in the chat, I know we've sort of had in the first session, we covered a little bit about your fields and the types of jobs. So are there any sort of very specific roles that you are already applying for or that you are planning to apply for once you graduate or, at a certain stage when you finish what you're doing now? So if there are particular roles, can you drop those into the chat now? Okay, researcher, yep, statistician. Thanks, Jamie. I think that's going to be quite common in this group. If there's something quite different from that, or any role that you have applied for recently in the field, research fellow. Okay, so there's some academic roles, data analyst or data scientist, yes, and that could be in industry or it could be again in academia. Lecturer, okay, yes. Biostatistician. Thanks, Matthew. Okay, that's probably enough. Okay, so that's just our reference point in terms of what we're going through. So let's jump on to look at the first section really is about your preparation. So the preparations is always the key to passing an interview. And there are a number of things that you need to cover off when you're talking about, when we're talking about preparing for a job interview to give you the best chance of succeeding in that and getting the job offer. And the most important one, we can't stress this enough, and even if I say it, I still get clients who haven't picked up things in the job ad when they go for an interview, is to really understand the job advertisement really thoroughly. So the point is, anything that's in there is fair game for them to ask about. So that first step, as we did with the resume, when we went back, if you remember in the first session, we did a job ad analysis so you could customize your resume and cover letter. You're obviously doing the same thing here, but identifying all the key technical terms and also like the behavioral things, like the soft skills. We suggested you pretty much ignore those for your resume and cover letter, things like attention to detail or being able to multitask, or it might be something teamwork, right? But if they're in there in the job ad, that means they're fair game for them to ask about. So that's number one. Really read out very carefully, highlight anything that is like a skill that they might ask about. And then for each one of those, what you really need to do is, because they could ask about it, is you want to think up an example for each of those. We'll come on the next slide to how you can do that. But that's your homework. That's the biggest part of your homework. Here's the job. If they ask about this particular duty or this requirement or this skill or this quality, what am I going to say? What example can I give that demonstrates I've got that? That's the biggest part. I think we can go on to the next point, Naren. Okay, so make sure you've read your resume, and we'll come back to that on a later slide. But make sure you know that well, because you could get a tricky question around that. And obviously, the company. Written there, try to find Finn's, sorry, the spelling mistake. Try to find a personal connection with what they do. So, for example, I had a client recently who was applying for a role with, it was a health thing. I can't remember the exact organization, but we talked about, is there someone in your family, for example, who's had that sort of particular health condition? Is there some sort of connection where you can say that this is why I'm really passionate or interested to work with you in particular? Now, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, look, I think obviously the key thing is when you get called for an interview with a company, you want to study there's three things I look for before I go for the interview. One is LinkedIn. Look at any connections I know, as Langdon mentioned. Google them and click on the news thing in Google. So it brings up any relevant news articles that's happened about the company. And obviously their website. Go through and study who their customers are, what they specialize in, their services. Maybe look, if they've got a careers page, look at the careers page to see, are they advertising other roles as well. And then obviously preparation, doing the homework. The way I like to prepare for resumes is I'll just come up with 50 odd questions that I think that they'll ask me based on my CV, based on the position description as well. And then I'll just work my way through each and every one of them.
And of course, these days, you don't need a career coach to write a list of questions for you. Simplest thing you can do is go to ChatGPT and say, prepare me 30 interview questions based on this job ad. And you basically copy and paste the whole job advertisement into ChatGPT, and it'll generate a whole lot of questions for you. So it's very easy to get sort of these interview questions, and definitely you should be doing this to prepare and give yourself the best shot at performing well in the interview.
Yeah, you can even put in ChatGPT, put in the company name, the job, because it'll scan through the web and find there may be like a forum where someone has had an interview for a biostatistician or a data scientist from that same company, and that person has put in the questions they had from an interview. So it's really valuable. Practice.
Yep. That's if you've got the internet connected ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right. So this is, so we're just going to a little bit more detail on each of these now. So this thing about thinking up of an example, if you've got some employment experience, that's going to be your best source of relevant stories, because obviously if you're telling a story, it's better in an interview if you can talk about it in terms of being an employment experience you had, a related one, right? If you don't have that, then obviously you're going to be talking about maybe some projects you did at university, some studies you did. It could also be an interest or volunteering thing, or even something outside that. If you're really stuck for good stories, more of like at the junior level, that last one there, are there certain like strengths you have, right? So the essential thing is, it's not enough if someone says, as an example question, tell us about your skills in supporting a good team environment. To talk in a general sense about, oh yeah, no, look, I think it's really important to have good communication when you're part of a team, and to help each other, yeah, and to just try to be friendly and helpful, and yeah. So, I mean, anyone can make up that answer. What's going to make your answer stand out, which we're going to emphasize over and over today, is that you need a good example of a time that you have been a good team member. So that's what this is about. You're going to go through that position description. What are they looking for? What's some sort of experience that's related or relevant for that in my life that I can draw on to tell a story?
Just to jump in, I think the key for me in an interview is essentially, two things. They want to know, can you do the job, or can you get close to doing it after maybe 3 to 6 months? Can you add value? So that comes down to your technical abilities, your knowledge, and your experience. And then the second part is, do they like you? Do you fit in with the company? If you come in there and you're really uptight, you're really strict, and the company culture is really flexible, I don't think it's going to work. One of our other colleagues and I, we interviewed someone 2 days ago for a UI UX sort of position with us. I hope he's not in today's session, but lovely guy, great skills, but we just didn't feel a connection with him. My other colleague, Parth, and I are pretty, we work hard and we're serious, but at the same time, we're a bit casual with our working style, and we just felt, this person is a great guy, but he can do the job, but we just don't think he's the right sort of cultural match to us. So I think that's also important. So if you can nail those three things, I think you go a long way to getting the offer. And don't forget, guys, and we'll cover this at the end around questions to ask, and it cuts both ways. Unless you're super duper desperate for a job and you desperately need this break for whatever reason, you also have to interview them. You have to make sure that the position, the company, hopefully your supervisors on the panel, that there is an alignment there. Okay. So you also need to make sure that, hey, this is a company and role that I'm also happy to take as well if I get the opportunity. All right.
Okay, so we talked before about the importance of memorizing a resume. This is just an example of the sort of question you might get, and if you obviously just sort of forgotten that because you haven't read your resume for 2 years, and you're struggling with this answer, that's going to look terrible because like this person doesn't remember what they've done, and therefore how can we trust them to remember their skills? And if you have a shot at it and say something different that's not on your resume, that looks absolutely terrible. And they think, oh, this person maybe lied on their resume, right? So that would be instant rejection. So just the importance of knowing your resume before you go in, because they'll have it on their desk in front of them, and it's fair game for them to ask about that. All right, we can go on with that. That's enough said about there, I think. Okay, here's so we were talking a bit before about the research. Darren mentioned going on the company's LinkedIn page, on obviously their website. So just doing the news search about the company, asking. So if you know people who have had any contact with that organization, the only thing you can do with asking is possibly using your LinkedIn profile and just sending out some connection requests to people who work at that organization, connecting with them and just say, if they're happy to connect, and you'll find maybe 1 in 10 people will accept if you send a nice little friendly connection message and sort of explain what you're connecting for, or don't be too pushy. You might find 1 in 10 people will connect with you. That's an opportunity then to say, oh, like, what's it like working there? I've got this upcoming interview. Have you got any tips or anything? So you can maybe get a bit of insider knowledge onto the organization. If you do find out anything interesting about them, like it's a really fantastic culture for a particular reason. Oh, they have this great support thing where they do every Friday afternoon. They have group chats or whatever. That's something you can even mention in the interview. When they say, why have you applied for this role? If they ask that question, you can show this sort of, you've done your research. And the other thing you can do is like visit the organization.
You would visit the organization? No, it's a bit risky.
Oh, well, as in, depending on the role, but if you're going to, I'm thinking of things, so I have a client who's wanting to get a retail area manager role. So he'll just walk into their shops, so, he wants to, so sort of like find out if you can go and actually see it yourself in person, see what it's like. That gives you some sort of experience to talk about.
Sure. All right. So this is a big slide, but here are the 3 types of interview questions you're likely to get during whether it's a Zoom interview, sometimes phone, but certainly face-to-face. So these are the general ones. Tell us about yourself. Why did you apply? When can you start? Strengths, weaknesses, career goals, what drives you, that sort of stuff. So this list is pretty standard, but common sort of generalish types of questions you get. But nonetheless, you have to prepare for them. Next.
Okay, so yeah. So then we've got, so I like to sort of link to the behavioral questions, which are general questions about the way that you operate in terms of managing tasks, in terms of your interpersonal skills, setting goals and achieving them, dealing with problems. And these questions could be related to any field, right? Whether you're going for a role as a scientist or as a data analyst, or even something like completely unrelated, like a retail manager. These roles are general questions about who you are as a person and how you manage your work life, right?
Yep.
The third set are the technical questions, if you sort of, and they'll be much more specifically related to the type of role that you're applying for, to understand whether you've got the technical skills. So here are some to do with, I think, data analysis and presenting insights or preparing surveys. So the second and third types of questions are basically opportunities for you, as we said before, to tell a story, right? So even questions like, what are the key considerations? Oh, okay, one of the behavioral ones.
Sorry.
That's okay. What are the key considerations when designing a customer satisfaction survey, right? So I could Google search that, right, and find out these are the key considerations, and you could list those off in an interview answer, but that would only get you like 3 or 4 points out of 10, because you've shown that you have the theoretical understanding of what those considerations are. How to get a really powerful, effective answer that's going to make you stand out as a candidate is, as we said before, you tell a story about a time that you prepared a customer satisfaction survey, in this case, or whatever it is. Can we just go back now into the previous slide? The behavioral questions. So how do you prioritize tasks? Or how would you deal with a difficult customer or client? Again, you could just give a theoretical answer. This is how I would do that, but much more effective if you've prepared a story around each of those. So that's why I see like the behavioral questions and technical questions, you're going to sort of use the same sort of basic answer structure for each of those, because what you want to do is tell a good, memorable story about the time that you solved a problem, right? So we'll go through that structure in a moment, but what we might do is just go back to that first set of questions now, because I remember you said you wanted to look at the opening pitch, for example, and work through these, because some of those questions in the first one actually came up in your list there, like what are your salary expectations?
Yeah. What we're going to do, guys, after we'll come back to those 3 types of particularly the technical and behavioral ones, and then we're going to give you a structure on how we would approach some of those questions, using that really good structure that gets you from just giving like like a basic answer in terms of the information, to telling the story. How should you structure the story? What goes in it? How long do you speak for? What constitutes a good story? So we'll give you the framework around that. But before we do that, I just wanted to get through the opening pitch. And then Langdon and I will give you the structure that we use for our clients to essentially deliver that opening pitch perfectly. So if it's possible, I might just put a call out to see, would anyone like to volunteer to participate in a quick mock interview just to check the opening pitch, and let's see how it goes. So if anyone's feeling really bold and adventurous and happy to participate, would love to hear your opening pitch on camera. And
You can just put up your hand, like raise your hand
your hand
in
or just
Zoom, or just or type into the chat.
Any volunteers?
Someone out there.
It's a good way to practice your opening pitch. You're going to get excellent free advice on how to perfect it. Everyone's a bit nervous. I don't know if I would volunteer, but Alex,
thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And Stacey, I think. But hey, Alex, how you doing?
I'm very good. Nothing to lose,
Nothing to lose, exactly.
No job at risk of.
Cool. Are you currently working or looking for work?
I'm in a weird situation. I'm currently working in a kind of temporary role, but then there's sort of a rehiring for kind of another temporary role that's very, very similar. So sort of working and sort of needing to look because my temporary role finishes soon.
And what's your field? What's your profession? What are you doing?
So I'm a teaching fellow.
Okay, so applying for academic types of roles or teaching roles?
Yeah, so another teaching fellow preferably, but if not, I'll try and get a data scientist role.
Yeah. And you're teaching at a university?
Yeah, as statistics at a university, yeah.
Yep, fantastic. All right, so let's, are you in Melbourne or where are you?
I'm actually in New Zealand, so.
Oh, you're in New Zealand, okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you get an invitation to attend AUT? No.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
For an interview for a level B academic teaching role, and you've been sitting in the waiting room, and then you've got Professor Langdon Rodder and me in the interview room, and you've taken your seat. There's a glass of water there, and we're going to start the interview. So thanks for coming in for today's interview, Alex. How's your day been?
It's been couldn't be better. How about you?
Yeah, all going well here. We've got quite a few interviews happening today, and you're the first cab off the rank, so we might just jump in if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Look, maybe to kick off, Alex, do you mind just telling us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm, my name's Alex Fowler. I've, my background at university, I did, maths and computer science at university. I've recently moved into statistics after working in a job where I found that statistics was really something I was quite passionate about. It was really what I wanted to do. And yes, so now I'm really excited to hear about this, this new position. I feel it matches my interests strongly. So yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Thanks very much, Alex. We'll jump into some questions now. All right. So that's your opening pitch?
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. How do you think you went?
Oh, probably, I don't know, maybe a 3 out of 10, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I tried to sound enthusiastic about the position and sound like an enthusiastic person in general. I don't know, maybe could have provided more detail on some of the things. I don't know. I'd be keen to hear.
Yeah. We'll walk you through it. Langdon, did you want to jump in with anything before we?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. I was going to ask how you think you could have improved it, and you said maybe I could have added more details. Is there anything else that you think?
Yeah, just I guess more targeted at maybe showing the type of person I am and how I'm suited to that particular role potentially. It was, yeah, but I can't think of any more right now. So
okay,
No,
there was
we're going to jump. Sorry,
I think
Len.
there's a lot of good, actually. I think there's a lot of positive in what you said. I think your basic structure there was pretty sound. Just, as you said, we need to expand a lot on it to make it sound like, by the time you finish that, it sounds like you are like a great candidate. And it's a lot more we can do around that. Yep. So let's Naren's going to walk us through that now, I think.
Yeah, just following on from what Langdon said, I thought started off really well. I was like, yeah, start off with your background about, you started off with a Bachelor of Science or something, and then you found your passion in statistics. You were telling a nice story. And then the only thing that sort of happened was it sort of just got cut short. And that's purely because we don't have the structure, but let's fix that up now. And it just takes practice. This opening pitch we're going to do now, super easy to remember. Your opening pitch, guys, you should just try and recite it. It's anywhere between 60 seconds to 90 seconds. You can modify it for different roles, but here's the structure. So let's get into it. Part one is what we call the thank you. So when they ask you, tell us about yourself or introduce yourself, the very first thing I like to do is just start off by saying, sure. Well, first of all, and feel free to screenshot this, guys, if you want. Well, first of all, I just like to say thank you for inviting me for today's interview. Okay, that's it. Just a quick intro to go. First of all, thanks for having me here today for the interview. Second, quick intro. I think you did.
Which Alex did. He introduced himself. So, my name's Alex Fowler.
And I think you got this part sort of right, Alex, which was good. I am a. Now, here's the part where you can add in and modify based on what the role is. So let's say Alex went for a role at Monash University, and the title of the role was, let's say, teaching fellow.
Teaching fellow, yeah.
Okay, and I am a teaching fellow. Or let's say the title was a postdoc, and I'm a postdoc or whatever it is. And I'm a teaching fellow with around X number of years experience in 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, these 3 things should be the top 3 things that they are looking for. So, for example, if the 3 things that come out in the job ad, if the 3 most crucial things in this role is curriculum design, assessments, and student management, then you're going to summarize those things. With around 3 years of experience in higher education, predominantly in curriculum design, assessments, and managing undergraduate and postgraduate students through courses including statistics, data science, and da-da-da. Okay, so that is your introduction. It's a quick little snapshot about you, okay? Next is, how do we call this? I just call it the middle part or the body.
Background?
Background or body, yeah. Background's probably better. Did you want to handle this one, Langdon?
Yeah, so essentially this is no more than 60 seconds at the most, just a summary of your progression through your qualifications and through any work that you've done in sequence. So this is the important thing. A lot of people, they'll say, oh, well, my most recent role was as I worked as a teaching fellow at such and such. Actually, because I started with doing this qualification, and so basically what they do is they just jump around all over the place, and it's very hard for the interviewers to follow your story. What you're trying to do is present a story that I started here. This was my first qualification. After that, I got this role, and then I moved on to that role. And what you're trying to do is mentioning along the way, and this is where you have that opportunity to put more detail in, Alex. where you no one's got in there. In that particular role, I focused on XXX, and then I got a new position here, and in that role, I've mostly been doing XX, X, Y, and G, right? So this is where you're expanding on your background to include how those previous roles, hopefully, relate to the role that you're applying for. So you're, again, just underlining, highlighting the relevant experience in a very sort of a quick, light way as you go through your background. The ultimate effect you want is that by the time you get to section 4, which we're about to get to, it should sound like, oh, well, it's a natural. And of course, naturally, he'd want to apply for this role because it seems like all that previous experience has led up to this role, right? There are so many connections with what this role is about in this person's previous experience. Now, if you haven't got that in terms of work employment experience, then it's going to be the projects you did and how they relate to the role that you're applying for, right?
Mm.
So now I'm just going through the trickiest part to remember probably is the structure for part 4. But it does a really good job of wrapping up your answer, connecting your previous experience or your current situation, and then talking about why you've applied for the role very briefly.
Mm.
And that's part 3 and 4, guys. Okay. I noticed, Alex, you sort of jumped to, I want to learn more probably within about 20 seconds. So you sort of skipped the main parts. But how does this structure look to you, Alex? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
I have an issue with this structure, and I'll talk about that in a second. But overall, which parts do you think you missed?
Certainly why I'm interested in the role. I didn't really go into specifics there.
Yep.
Going through the background probably in more, and also tailoring my background to the skills and what they're looking for in the role.
Yep.
And the current situation.
For everyone who's in the Zoom, feel free to use the chat, and I wouldn't mind getting your feedback on this structure. Any criticism or faults with it, or what's good about it. While you do that, I'm just going to give you just a quick. So this one here, just 10 seconds. This one here, maybe
5 seconds probably.
5 seconds really, but just in case. 15 to 20 seconds, absolute max. The background, you don't want to do more than 60 seconds. And this one, 10, 15 seconds as well. So really, you should be able to deliver your opening pitch within a minute and a half. Ideally, if you can trim it to like 75 seconds. A couple of quick tips. If you're doing an opening pitch on the phone, it's got to be shorter. People have less attention span on the phone. So I would trim a lot of this stuff. For phone, if it's in person, you can stretch it to a minute and a half, but that's absolute max. So any criticisms? Sorry, Jamie, can you scroll down? Yep, got it. I'll tell you the one thing that's somewhat concerns me about this, and I've had this feedback before, which is, why am I just telling them everything that's in my resume? They know it all. We know. But this is like a bit of it's just an icebreaker. They just want you to talk about something that you're not nervous about. And they know all of this stuff, but what you're doing is you're demonstrating that, hey, I can summarize me as a professional and why I'm a good match to this in about 90 seconds, and then you can bombard me with your questions. Okay, so this is a good structure, guys, that I sort of like. Alex Fowler doesn't say much about the person you are, just your skills match. Yeah, I mean, you could you could weave it in here, Alex. In terms of my background, I'm passionate about using, or about using data to make informed decisions on weather patterns, if that's the area of the role. So you can weave it in there if you want, but that's a fair point. So this structure gives you like a really nice framework to have that answer, so you don't panic when you go for that interview and they go, tell us about yourself. So hopefully this will help you guys to organize your answer there. Now, sometimes you'll go to an interview and you've prepared, Narron and Langdon's magic formula and you're ready to go. You take your seat and you're waiting for it. You're waiting for them to go, tell us about yourself. And they throw a curveball at you and they say, thanks for coming in today, Alex. Tell us something about you that's not on your resume. Or they'll ask you something controversial and they'll say, what are your thoughts on the Australian political landscape at the moment? Don't know. Okay. Or something along those lines where basically they're asking you, the first thing they're asking you is not this. And then that's going to throw you because you're going to be like, hang on, I'm about to deliver my 90-second pitch. Okay. So there will be times where they don't ask you this. They may start off by saying, thanks for coming in today, Alex. Why are you here? What made you apply for this role? Okay. So opening pitch, guys. Hopefully that gives you the right sort of framework to get the right pitch happening. So I guess we can keep moving if there are no questions on that. So thanks, Alex, for being part of the volunteering. All right. So answer structures. Langdon, did you want to handle this one?
Oh no, can we jump back just quickly
Yep.
to because there were a couple of the first the going back to type 1 questions, questions about you. So we're going to look at how you structure your answers for behavioral and technical questions in a moment. But so we've covered that first one. Tell us about yourself. Why did you apply? I just want to make some quick notes about some of these before, because these are like slightly different from the answer structure that we're going to present in a moment. Why did you apply for the role? You should have at least 2 reasons. That's one of the key things here. Maybe 3 if you can get them, but always have at least 2 reasons. Number one is going to be that you're a strong match for the role, right? You've got the skills to perform the role, and you want to talk specifically about what those matching skills are and your experience, and maybe a little bit about how you've got that. Every opportunity you've got to emphasize that you've got the skills for the role, you want to take it. So that question, why did you apply, is an opportunity for you to say, well, because I've got this specific background for the skills for this role, A, B, and C, that's what seems to be what you're looking for, and I've certainly got that experience or those skills from my studies, right? The other thing is, though, that's where that research comes in. You want to say something about the particular company that you've applied for, right? So it's not just you're looking for a role as a data scientist, for example. I'm looking for a data scientist role, okay, and I've got good data science skills. To get the best chance of getting a job offer, you want to show that you're actually particularly interested in working with this company. And that's where that research we talked about earlier comes in. If you can find something there that really inspires you or interests you in working for that company, that's the opportunity to mention that. And that's going to make you just stand out from other people who just say, well, yeah, I think I can do this role, right? Instantly. When can you start? Pretty straightforward. Salary expectations. This is a hard one, and I think that came up in the tricky questions that we asked at the start for you to put into the chat. Now, do you want to type that, or should we just jump into a Word document?
Yep. So before we jump into the salary question answer, it might be good just to get some feedback from everyone here. How do you tackle that answer? So feel free to use the chat box and pop in there. If you were sitting in an interview and they said, what sort of salary are you looking for? How would you answer that, guys? So we'll just give you guys a couple of minutes. Feel free to use the chat box. Jamie, okay, thanks. We'll get to that one in a sec. So, what are your salary expectations? How do you handle that one?
Or how would you go about preparing for that sort of question even? Okay, what is your expected? How do you work out what your expected salary is, Eva? Do you just go, my lifestyle demands that I earn $110,000 to finance my, my overseas trips each year? How do we work out what an expected salary and also something obviously that is within reason for the role, right? Because obviously, if you say something that's just way out of the ballpark, you're not likely to get the job offer.
Yep. Cool. So let's workshop this answer. I think a couple of people have
yeah, someone said there, look up the average salary for that position. Yes.
Yep. So Eva is just saying, yep, I just told them, look, I'm expecting, $85,000, which is fair enough. The only thing there, Eva, is if they're offering like 105, then they'll probably think, hang on, this person doesn't really understand the market, or we can lowball her. But yes, a lot of government jobs, uni jobs, it's like within a band. So you should know that, and you can just say, look, it's the salary I'm looking for is within the Hue 9 band that was advertised on the position description, so that's fine with me. So Edwin's asking, do you tell them about your current pay? I wouldn't, and they technically can't ask you for that. But if they ask you, what are your salary expectations, there's a few ways to answer it. One is you can say, I am happy to accept the salary on offer, or at the
award rate, or
at the rate for a mid-level biotech analyst with 5 years of experience. So it's something like that. Another way to handle it is to say, look, while salary is important, for me right now, I am focusing on the position alignment or something like that to my career. And so making sure that this role is a good match for both me and the organization is key, or something like that, is my priority right now. I'm happy to talk about salary later down the recruitment track, or at second round interviews or something like that. So that's another way of diplomatically of answering the question. I actually gave that answer to my last role because it was a private public university arrangement, so they didn't have what we call Hue levels in the higher ed system. And I gave that answer. I thought, haha, that's fine. I'll be able to work out the salary. And the HR manager at the time, Glenn, he just stared back at me and he said, that's all good and well, but I need to know, what is your expectation? And I sort of froze and I was like, oh my goodness, how do I get that? And I had to tell him. So when I didn't have a choice and I had to give him a figure, I knew the figure anyway in terms of what I was going to say. So normally what I would say is, I'll say, sure, well, I have seen similar associate director roles being advertised between 120K to 140K plus super. So my expectations are around that range. Okay. Now, if I desperately want the job, okay, and I'm not and I'm flexible with salary because I want it. However, I am happy to be flexible for the right role. Okay. So that's another way of handling it. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into how to handle that salary question. Okay. Some of the things not to avoid would be to say, look, I don't know. I'm just happy with whatever you are providing. Or to give like a massively inflated figure or something that's well below the rate that you should be getting.
Yeah.
But if you do a little bit of homework, you should have a good range in mind.
So I think Jody actually wrote in there, I normally look up the average salary, and you can do that on obviously on Seek, on if there's a page of award rates for different roles, anything you can do. You can also go into Seek and toggle the salary range and see what roles are coming up within different salary ranges, or like top salary, to get an idea of where other people might be at in terms of those types of roles.
Cool.
Let's jump back to those questions, Naren, can we?
Yep.
Just quickly go through. I think there were just one or two maybe just worth covering then before we just need to then get through a bit more before we have our break.
Yeah.
Is everyone doing okay in terms of we can keep on going for another 10 or 15 minutes?
Yep. I think we'll fly through this and then we'll have a quick break and then just...
Okay, so we've covered salary expectations, what motivates you, obviously related to something related to the job, right? That is going to make you a standout. What if they want to pay 138 and then with giving this range, they choose 120?
Then it just comes down to the negotiation. So the salary for different roles is about negotiation, Mohammed, as well. So if you say, look, between X and Y, and they offer you 120, that's fine. You can just go back to them and say, look, then I think someone else used I think it was Edwin, about like your current. And again, I've done this before where I was switching between RMIT University to Monash, and it was a bit of a lucky one. Luckily, I was transparent up front, because when I went to Monash, again, there was some flexibility with salary. There's different bands within the Hugh level. You can be a Hugh 8 level 1, then up to 5. And I was at the top of a Hugh level. And I said, and Monash said, we're offering you this. And I said, well, currently I'm on this. And I said, I'm not going lower. I'm happy to stay at the same because it was a better opportunity for me, but I'm not going lower. And they asked me for a copy of my RMIT payslip. And I said, sure, no problem. So I sent it and they matched it. So yeah, salary is negotiable, guys.
Okay, the other thing, quickly jump in. If I had a client just last week who got offered a role, it was less than what she wanted, but she didn't have a lot of options in terms of role. She's a very specific niche career, and this role was probably being underpaid. And we had a discussion about how she's going to negotiate that. And what she's come out with, is that, well, that's what they're going to pay her now, but she's set up that they will renegotiate her salary after 3 months. So that's the other thing you can put in place. If you maybe don't have a lot of wriggle room, is you can say, can we have a salary, negotiation again after 6 months when I've proven myself in the role? And most companies will probably be happy to do that. Career goals. Okay, very quickly, we suggest you talk about short-term career goals. The short-term career goal is essentially to try to get exactly the role that you're applying for. Like, this is my absolute perfect career goal to get this role. And then what they're obviously interested in is your longer-term career goals as well, because they want to see that there's an alignment between this role you're applying for and your long-term roles, your long-term goals. So if, there's something, I'm applying for this job as a data analyst, but what I really want to be is a, high-level professor at a university, they're going to think, oh, how long is it before this person just leaves? Because this doesn't necessarily line up with their long-term goals. So if you can make sure there's an alignment there, you're more likely to get the job. I think with the time now, and we probably should just keep going onto the how to structure your answers. Yep. So we've talked about the behavioral and technical questions need a story, right? So we want to sort of present this structure to you. It means you're not going to start rambling and get lost in an answer. If you have a nice, clear structure, you're a good communicator, and it helps showcase, your experience. So let's have a look at the structure that we're suggesting for you. So this is for technical questions, where they ask about a particular skill, and also for behavioral questions. Can you tell us about a time you demonstrated such a thing, or how would you handle that situation? Remember, I said the really way to stand out here is to tell a story, because people love hearing stories. So if you're going to come in and say, oh, I can remember a time actually in my last role, straight away, people just lean forward and go, oh yeah, tell us a story about that. So you engage the listeners in a much more direct and interesting way than if you just start telling about, oh, well, this is how you do it. You do A, B, C, and D, which is the same answer they get from everyone, right? So tell a story. So if we can go on to the next slide, Aaron. We're essentially going to, broadly speaking, 3 parts to your answer: a quick introduction, then your example, and then a conclusion to wrap up, right? So very classic 3-part structure. In your introduction, most people, when they're asked to give an example of a time, for example, that they needed to, they found an error in some data or something, right, that they were analyzing. They'll go, oh yes, I can think of a time, actually, it was like a couple of years ago. What you're doing is, by just talking about one specific example or story and just going straight into that, you're missing the opportunity to, maybe you've had that experience, or you've got experience in that particular area over a few years, or in a number of different projects that you've worked on. And by not mentioning that, you've just missed that opportunity to show, this is how much experience I've got here. So we suggest a quick introduction where, for example, tell us about a time you prepared. Okay, well, there's a mismatch in the question and the answer there, I think, probably, because this was updated very recently. But if you tell us a time that you created a data visualization, right, for a project rather than marketing materials. Tell us about a time you created a data visualization, what tool you used for that. You could go straight into your, oh yes, okay, there was a project I was doing this. But your introduction is an opportunity to say, well, actually, with data visualizations, I've created them for 5 different projects, including this project, and this project. Or perhaps you mentioned different types of data visualizations, like scatter plots and heat maps and so on. So a whole range of different things. So straight away, you're saying, look, this is something I've got a lot of experience in. Now let me tell you about my example. Right? So you're just presenting yourself as someone with more experience. You're talking about the range of your experience there. That's the great thing to do in an introduction, if you can.
Yeah. Just to add to that is, with this introduction, guys, it does a couple of things. One, it's like a bit of a warm-up to the answer. And second, it's buying you some time to come up with an example, because you're not going to have examples ready to go for each. You don't know every question they're going to have. There are some exceptions for some government roles. They actually, before the interview, you'll come, say, 10, 15 minutes before, they'll actually give you the 5 questions or 3 questions that you're going to get. Okay, so there are some exceptions. But with this introduction, it's just, think of it like just a bit of a warm-up before you give the example. We'll go to that in the next part. So if we take the question here, let's say, tell us a time you created, tell us about your most impactful data visualization project. Instead of jumping in and going, yes, it was with BHP where I did this. Just take a step back and go, sure, well, look, I have been involved in a whole range of different data visualization projects for clients such as BHP and Rio Tinto and Orican or something like that, where I have worked with large data sets to provide stakeholders with data. Just a quick introduction. Then you go into your example, okay? Langdon, did you want to explain how this one works?
Yeah. Now, if any of you have looked around at how to answer interview questions, you've probably come across this STAR structure before. Actually, at its heart, it's just basically how any story operates, right? So every time you watch a movie, every time you read a book, watch a TV show, essentially this is what you're being presented with. So it's just actually good storytelling, right? So first of all, you laid out in the situation, okay, what was your role at the time? or what was your project that you were doing? What was the intended outcome? Maybe who was the client you were working with, or what was the data set, or who were the group of students that you were working with, right? It's just all that background story that if you don't provide that and you just start talking about what you did, the listeners are all the time struggling to try to place it in a context, and it's harder for them to understand what you did and harder for them to focus on it. So you put all that information right out there at the start, and then they can sort of relax and put everything you say after that into that context. So the situation should involve maybe how long ago it was. Hopefully it wasn't too long ago. It might involve the role that you were in at the time, what was the company or the organization you were working with, what was the particular, if it was something to do with data, maybe what was the type of data you were working with, etc. So having presented that background, they can relax. Okay, right, we've got the picture now. What happened? So the task is essentially what you needed to achieve, right? I actually like to call this the problem. What was the problem you were solving? How you were helping with, right? So it might be in data analysis to identify what particular drivers were, or factors were influencing the recent sort of, maybe there was a drop in performance or drop in sales for a company. That's your problem that you needed to identify, or the task. Yeah. So what insights could you give about this particular set of data? Now, the most important part of your answer, the whole answer, introduction, example, conclusion, is in this actions part, and it should be about half of the length of your answer. At least this is how important it is, because this is where you get to talk about what you did and what you know how to do. And by describing that step by step, you are creating a little movie in the interviewer's minds about how you created, how you set up that database, or you accessed that, or you extracted that data, you analyze it using this tool, you created these data visualizations, etc. To find out what to solve the problem, or to achieve the task, right? That has to be a clear step-by-step process, so they can actually understand that they really get a clear picture that you know how to do that task. And that's ultimately what they're trying to check here. If it's a technical question, can you do this task? If we hire you, can we say to you, oh, Alex, can you please, prepare that materials for that class and then teach it next semester? They want to know if you've got the skills to do that. And the best way to demonstrate that is to talk through step by step how you've already done it in a previous role. We suggest about 3 or 4 or 5 steps. In that, 1 or 2 steps doesn't really, even cooking an egg on a stove, whatever, has more than 2 steps in it, right? So it's just going to sound a bit basic, like you don't really understand the depth of a task or a process if you just have 2 steps in it. If you have more than about 5 things there, it's going to the answer's going to start to drag on, and a bit like this explanation. So maybe 3 or 4 or 5 steps, leading then to the result. Hopefully that you found that you demonstrated a particular correlation between sets of data, or what was the insight, and ideally maybe what was the impact of that was, right? So if you had demonstrated that there was a certain correlation of data, you could reveal an insight into what was driving a particular set of information. Then how maybe did that improve things for the organization? What difference did that make in the longer term? So you're seeing demonstrating what impact you could make on the organization you're interviewing for.
After the break, we'll show you guys a model example of how this STAR method can work. So we've got the example there, guys, and that should make up 60% of the answer. And then at the end, we've got a quick conclusion, which is a little bit different to the results. So it's more a mirror of the introduction, where the introduction is saying, sure, look, I've worked on about 5 different data visualization projects in my career over the past 2 years, particularly with BHP and da-da-da. So that's your introduction, giving them the detailed example of one project where you go into detail about what you did, how you did it, what problem you were solving, who was involved in the project, and the result of that project. So, and you can say, look, the result of this project was we were able to do this, which added value here, solved the customer's issue here, presented new findings on this. It was able to reveal da-da-da, okay? And then the conclusion is, go back to the theme of the question, which could be data visualization, and say, so look, that was just one example of my work where I was involved with a team on data visualization projects. It was a fantastic way for me to get involved in X, Y, Z. And, I noticed on the PD that working with Python and Power BI is part of this position. And that's certainly something I have quite a lot of experience in and, quite keen to get involved in. And that's the conclusion to that answer. Okay. So you can also finish the answer by saying thank you. So they know you're done. So when you are giving these answers for behavioral and technical questions, I like to think of the answer as like a movie. Like in a movie, you'll always have sort of the opening, the introduction, getting to know who the characters are, what's the plot, what's going on. And then it's the main story in the middle. And then there's a conclusion at the end. What happens? What happened to the main character? Did they do this? Did they do that? And that's the ending. So with most movies, when you come to the ending, you'll be satisfied. You'll be like, oh, yeah, that was great. He did this, or that happened. She did that. And your answer should be the same. You've got to take the panel on that journey. Okay. You have to be captivating. You have to tell that story. You have to be a good storyteller. The hardest part about interviews is that you're not always going to have 20 stories off the top of your head ready to go. The best way to do that, guys, is practice and having those stories already in your bag. Okay, so what I do when I prepare for interviews is I'll look at the job description, I'll look at the PD, I will pick out the themes. There may be 5 or 6 main clusters of what they're going to ask me about. And then I'll draw like, okay, they're asking me about this topic here. When did I do something vaguely similar to that? That's right. When I was, back in 2020, I was working on that. Then I'll retrace my steps and I'll come up with some information about that project. Then I'll go to the next cluster. So by the end of it, I've got like project-based examples ready to go. I know it may not apply to everyone here, but you've got to sort of find those stories or projects or examples or situations where you were involved in topics that link back to what they're looking for. So hopefully that has given you guys a bit of an overview as to how you can structure your answers using this 3-part process: quick introduction, an example, and a conclusion. Okay. Towards the end of the presentation, guys, I think it's important for us to talk about how to handle a question where you have no idea what they're asking about. So maybe just if you feel that's something important to you, just ping us in the chat and we'll come back to it, because it does happen. But I think what we'll do now, guys, is we'll take a short sort of 5 to 7 minute break. When we come back, we're going to do a couple of things. Number one, we'll show you some samples of what a good STAR method answer is. And then we might just ask if anyone, again, apart from Alex, if anyone wants to be involved in a like a 5 to 7 minute quick mock interview practice run with Langdon and myself, you can participate in that. And similar to what we did with Alex, we'll give you guys some feedback at the end. So it's nearly 10 past 1. What if we come back, we'll kick off at about, 7 past 1:17, 1:18. So we'll give ourselves a little bit more time. So maybe in about 5 to 7 minutes, if you want to log back in, and we'll continue. So thanks for being part of it so far, and we'll see you after the break.
Yeah, we can just put your camera and microphone off, and then you sort of don't have to relog back in fact. Okay. Welcome back. Right, so we're going to kick off with just an example of a star answer. Someone, Jamie's just written there, I suppose ChatGPT will be very helpful in giving a good start. Yes, certainly ChatGPT will help with all this sort of stuff, including giving suggested answers. The thing, of course, is to then carefully go through that and customize and adapt it for your own experience, for your own skills, because it's doing that out of the context of what you've actually in particular done. And there's a real risk. This is a problem with a lot of the ChatGPT generated cover letters and resumes, which are becoming, increasingly the way that people are applying for jobs, because they're so easy and quick, that it's not actually really customized for the role, and doesn't really speak in depth and detail about your actual experience. So make sure, so use it as that way of giving you an idea about the structure, perhaps, and then adapt it for your own experience. So let's have a quick look at an example. I'm going to share my a document here. This is from a client who that we're working on this question. Tell us about a problem you had with data wrangling. How did you solve it? So after a little bit of an introduction, which is just about the role of, it's a bit personalized. It's like she talks about how she, before you come to the fun part of doing the analysis, the data must be cleaned. She understands this is an important part of the process. She could also just, as we suggested before, said, oh yes, I've performed data wrangling in actually 8 different projects, or pretty much every project, data analysis project I've done, and this has involved using tools such as Python or SQL or Excel. So she talk about that breadth, the broad idea of her experience in data wrangling, and then going into examples. So this one, we've actually got the client to actually write it out here. We've got the situation, task, action, and a result. So let's just have a quick look through. So her background is she's just talked about the role she had and the company she worked with. This is just a made-up company. I worked on a variety of data analysis projects. She's mentioned some software that she used for that. And one such project was to estimate the salaries of jobs listed on Indeed. Right, so this might have actually been like a study thing, like a study project. I've played around with this. So this was the idea. This was the project she was doing, and the particular task was, however, the data I gathered had a lot of issues and the problems with it, needed significant cleaning before I could use it for the analysis. So that's like laying out the problem that she had to solve with her actions. So there was a question in the chat about that. What's the difference between task and action? So that's what she needed to do. This is then step by step how she did it. So if you look at the keywords in here, you'll see that there's a sense of a sequence of actions. So we've got, let's color these in green. So first I did this, and she talks about how she used the web scraping function. Her next step was to do this into a single representation, use regular expressions, blah, 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 blah. Then after that, there was the next step, removing duplicates. And finally, there was this next step here, where for dealing with the incomplete information, she grouped, this is how she solved that, right? So this is the key to an effective action section. There's a sense of the steps that you performed to complete that challenge, whatever it was, to solve that problem, to achieve that task. This is how you convincingly, this is how you convince the panel that you know how to do this particular task, because you've broken it down and clearly laid it out for them step by step. This is how I do this. So they know that you can do it. And the other great thing about doing this is, as you're going through and describing it, they should actually get a little bit of a movie playing in their head, right? So they can picture you doing it. And once they've got those pictures in their head, that's what they'll remember after the interview's finished. Because they won't remember all these words, but if you can put a picture in their head of how what a capable data wrangler you are, and you did this, you used the Panda library to do that, you did that, then that those pictures will stay long after the interview is finished, and that's what they'll be thinking about when they're trying to choose candidates. If they've got this picture in their head of what a great data wrangler you are, they're going to gravitate towards you. And finally, the result, by preparing the data, I was able to do what? Create a machine learning model that predicted the salary by considering a job title and description. As such, a user could consult this model to deem the worthiness of a job application. Right? So that was the outcome of those tasks. This is the difference that she made, or well, she solved the problem, she achieved the task. So there's a quick example of the structure laid out step by step. What we might do is, now, did you want to sort of get someone up and volunteer, and we can ask them a question and see if they can put this into practice?
Yep, sure. We have a couple of options. I'm just seeing if anyone would like to be a participant and volunteer to do a quick interview. We'll wait and see. If anyone's keen to get some interview practice under your belt, now's a good time. If not, we can...
I'm sure there's someone. I'm sure there's someone. They're all so confident in their interview skills that they think, I don't need to practice. I can just walk in and ace any interview.
That's all right. If anyone does want to participate at a later point, we can jump back in. But going back to Langdon's example, another tip, guys, is not to. There's a couple of things. One is if you're doing a Zoom interview, and this has happened to me where I've been interviewing someone and I know they're reading off another screen. So I've asked them a question and I can see they're ruffling around a little bit, clicking around, and then they go, sure. Well, in terms of a project where I was involved with difficult stakeholders, there was one time, and you know they're sort of reading off the screen, so just avoid that. I think it was the global head of HR at Google. Their biggest tip for practicing and preparing for interviews was to basically create a document and write all the answers. You may end up with 5,000 words, but physically sitting at your computer and typing and reading, that is the best way. And that's how I practice as well, which is I'll come up with my 25 to 50 questions and I will type my answers using that framework there. And then what I'll do is I will read it out loud. And then what I'll do is I'll pick a question and then I'll look away and I'll try and recite my answer. I'll screen record myself to see how it sounds, the tone, the pitch, the pace, things like that. So certainly writing those answers is really important. So moving along to some other aspects of interviews, in terms of some do's and don'ts, there are some what we call sort of interview etiquette aspects to this whole thing. So there are some things in terms of what you shouldn't ask. But before we jump into this, I might just get a feel from you guys. What are the red flags? What are some of the key things you should never ever ask in an interview? I might just give you a minute, just use the chat box just to say, you know, what are the key things you would never ask in an interview? What's a big no-no? Or if you were interviewing someone, what sort of questions would sort of rub you the wrong way? What would you go, hang on, that's not an appropriate or a good question from a candidate? Feel free to use the chat box, guys. What's a question you should avoid? Bit of a tricky one at times, but what are the staff benefits? Yep, that's a good one. Salary, definitely. So those are really two good ones. So what have we got here? How much do you pay? Yep.
Another one is, how quickly could I progress to another role in the organization?
Yeah. This is a common question people ask, which is, do you provide, what sort of training do you provide? That's what, can anyone explain why you think that's a bad question? I mean, it comes naturally. It's like, okay, I'm starting new. What sort of training do you guys provide? I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts. Feel free to use the chat box. But the reason why I don't like that is because, you're joining that company to add value, to work, to be productive, to support the team, to help clients. And we're not paying you to do training. Okay, yes, of course, there must be some induction and a bit of training involved, but certainly if you ask that tells the panel, oh, this person may not have the skills that we're looking for. So avoid that question. Yeah, sometimes people ask this one, which is a bit strange. Are you interviewing? How many other candidates are you interviewing? A bit weird. Never ask that question. Can you tell me about this role? Okay. Another tip is this: if you see a job advertised and you want to apply, it's best not to call up the recruiter and ask, I've just seen this, analyst role advertised on Seek. Can you tell me a bit about it? Okay. It's probably even worse if you call the hiring manager. Because normally the PD, the JD should have everything you need. If you do want to call up before you lodge the application, then have a specific question in mind. Okay. So it might be something about it being hybrid. So you could call up and say, look, I was just about to lodge my application, and I was just curious to know what is the hybrid model for you guys? Okay. Or if it says fully remote, call up and say, look, I understand it's fully remote. I just wanted to check, would there be any office in the future or something like that? But don't call up and say, can you tell me a bit more about the role? Recruiters don't like that. Companies don't like that either. Okay. And definitely don't do that in an interview. What you should ask. You should ask probably 2 really good questions at the end of the interview. Okay. Sometimes during the interview, it's okay to ask questions, but I'll just give you guys a couple of minutes. What are some of the good questions you should ask at the end when they give you the opportunity to ask some questions? What questions come to mind? Spend a minute or 2. Feel free to use the chat box. What questions have you asked before? And what questions do you think are really good questions to ask in an interview? Good interview questions to ask.
Is it okay to not ask a question? What message do you think, Alex, it sends to the panel about your level of interest and enthusiasm for the role if you just say, no, look, I haven't got any questions?
Unless you already had the answers, maybe.
Right, but all the same, if you just still back, no, I've heard everything, I'm fine. They've given you an opportunity to engage and find out more about the role or the organization or some aspect of your work. And if you just sit back and say, no, I'm fine, I'm good, compared to someone who goes, oh, yes, I'd really like to ask about this particular thing. So if they have already provided you maybe with the information that you would have asked about, right? Maybe at the start of the interview, they say, well, here's a quick overview of the role. And they go run through a whole lot of stuff, and you're thinking, oh, I was going to ask that. Oh, I was going to ask about that. Then what I would do at the interview, right at the end then, is say, look, well, thank you for the information you've already supplied about the role. I remember you told me that I'd be working with such and such a group or on such and such a project. Could you tell me a bit more about that project? I'd really like to find out what stage it's at now, or, are there particular challenges that project is facing that I'd be working on, etc. So definitely, we recommend that you definitely want to take that opportunity because it just shows your engagement and your interest in understanding more. If you started the role, you'd have 100 questions, right? So here's a chance to get ahead and show that you're trying to psychologically, if you like, or just prepare yourself for the role by finding out more about it.
Is it okay to say, can I, if I get the role, then I'll have questions, or you really want to ask the questions then?
We think that you're much better off asking some questions, because if you don't, and the next person does, and the next person asks some really, good pointed questions about the role, who comes across as a better candidate?
Yeah, yeah.
You've always got to remember that it's a competition, right? Unfortunately, it's you versus other candidates, and you need to be the standout candidate in every way that you can be.
Thank you.
Yep. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make in an interview is at the end, if you have the opportunity to ask some questions and they go, no, don't have any questions, everything sounds really good, I'm happy, you have to have a couple of questions. Now, a couple of key points here. Never ask a question that, as you mentioned, I think, Alex, that they've already covered. So if during the interview they say, look, the main technology that we work on is Python and RStudio and Power BI, and then at the end you go, yeah, look, I'm just interested. I'm really good at Tableau. Do you guys use Tableau, or what are the main technologies you guys use? That will tell them A, you don't listen, and B, just, it's been covered. So don't ask anything that they've already covered before. A really good way to ask a question is to ask a question on something that they've covered during the interview. So, for example, if they say, let's say they're working on there's a question like automation or something. You could, at the end, you could say, look, earlier in the interview, Doug, I think you mentioned about how you guys are starting to use automation in your reporting. I was just interested to know, have you started using NLP for da 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 da? Okay, so you're taking a concept that has been covered, and now you're taking it to the next level with some other technology. That's a really good way to demonstrate, A, you're a subject matter expert on that particular area that they've covered, and B, you're thinking about the next steps about how you can use NLP or something else to build on the automation project that they're working on. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Jamie has asked, should I ask a question like, how has this job become vacant? I think it's probably an okay question earlier on in your career for very, very, junior people. But it's really not adding value to you, demonstrating your skills and suitability for the role. Think of it like this. The questions you ask are as powerful as the answers you're meant to give to their questions. So anything you say or do in an interview should highlight your capabilities and suitability for the role. So by asking a question, how did this role come about? It's not adding to you it's not showcasing your talents or your strengths to what they're looking for. So keep that in mind when asking questions. Okay. Not bad, Jamie, where you say, is there an exciting new project? So if you link it to that, it's probably okay, but there are some other questions we can jump to in a sec. Okay, Tianyu, when do I expect to get back? Yep, that's a nice way to finish off your questions. Okay, so there is a little bit of a science to how you ask questions, and we'll cover that now. At the end, there's a couple of things, guys. So when you're in an interview, you have to gauge whether or not they actually really want you to ask questions, or whether they've had enough and they want you to skip over it. So at the end, if they don't even give you the opportunity to ask questions, I don't think you can jump in and say, look, sorry, before we go, I have some questions. Just feels a bit unnatural. I mean, you could, because that could be a test. It could be a test about initiative or leadership or something like that. But it depends again on how they wrap it up. If they go, look, thank you, Darren, thank you for coming in. We've got some other candidates today, especially if the interview hasn't gone well, it's probably not going to help. But you could jump in and say, oh, look, just before we finish, I just had a couple of quick questions. Okay. So if they ask you, do you have any questions, Darren? You can say, yes, look, Fantastic. Thank you for your time. I just had a couple of quick questions. Use that phrase. I just have a couple of quick questions. Now, here are some questions you can ask. Langdon, I'm not a big fan of this one, but that's okay.
No, I think this is that. So we've got some questions in here for different levels. So if you're very junior, that might be a suitable thing here. The main challenges of the role, I wouldn't ask that as a first question because it sounds like you may be a bit focused on the negative. So team structure, if you don't know about that. Now, my favorite one here probably is number 5. You know, what does success look like? It's like, how are you going to measure my success in this role? So you understand exactly what you're aiming at to how to perform in the role. I think the challenges one can be good, but I wouldn't lead with it. Now, are there any other comments on those?
Oh, look, I think certainly number 3 is a good one. If it's not in the PD, it's on the website. And it hasn't been covered. I think that's a nice, easy, soft one. Number 4 is also a bit subjective. You know, sometimes they have to think too much. It's not a bad one, number 4. Number 5 is quite good. Another way of asking number 5 is to say, sure, look, I've just got a couple of quick questions. Look, I think my first question would be, you know, what would be the main priorities in this role? Perhaps in the first 30, 60, or 90 days? And what does success look like in this role, perhaps in the first sort of 3 months? Okay. So, and then they'll go, oh, okay, that's good. He's asking about, yeah, well, look, success would be around, you know, jumping into our new system and doing da-da-da. Okay. So that's definitely a good question. You could say, look, you know, if I was offered this position, I guess, you know, I'd be interested to know what are the sort of the major challenges you think I'll face, you know, as a data analyst working here at da-da-da-da-da. And then they'll explain.
Yeah, this also is an opportunity to show off any research you've done. Like if you, for example, find out that one of the panel members actually is now in a senior level, but actually, if you look at their LinkedIn profile, you could see that they actually were in this role that you're applying for maybe last year. You could say, oh, Amanda, I noticed that you actually were in this role last year. I'd love to hear a bit more from you about what the main challenges and the, you know, achievements, or, you know, like the what you found most interesting about this role or most challenging, right? So it's a little just way of dropping in the fact that you've done your research on these people and the company.
Yeah. Another good one, perhaps more for a juniorish mid-level role, would be, yeah, sure. Look, I'm just interested to know, what does a typical day look like as a biotechnician here at da-da-da-da? What does a typical day look like here? Okay, and then they'll walk you through and say, well, look, you know, there's a different parts of the role, da-da-da-da. And then you've just got to nod and go, yeah, okay, great, sounds good. So those are some questions there you can ask. The ones that I really, really like getting asked is particularly when the candidate picks up on something that has already been discussed during the interview and they extrapolate on that. That tells me, okay, they're really, you know, eager and keen and they're switched on.
And they're a good listener.
Yeah. And I think the last thing you can say is pretty much what Tian you mentioned in the chat is you can basically wrap the questions up by saying, look, you know, those are all the questions I had. Thank you so much for your time today. Look, I think my last question will be, you know, what are the next steps from here? Or what's the process like from here? Okay. And then they'll say, yep, well, we are interviewing other candidates. There's a second round interview. There's a technical test, something like that. Okay. And that's the last bit there. Okay. So on the day of your interview, Langdon, did you want to tackle these ones?
Yeah, I think you talked about this a little bit at the start. Now, the important thing to understand about this, your actual presentation on the day, how you behave in the interview, how you relate to the interviewers, is they're going to read that as how you'll be in the job. Right? So however you present on the day, this is how you're going to be if you're offered the role. Now, it might be a bit unfair because most people are a bit nervous in an interview and, you know, might be feeling the pressure and might, you know, it's hard to be relaxed in yourself if you're feeling nervous. However, you've got to understand that's how they're going to be reading you. So if whatever behaviors you show there, you're early, you're on time, you're polite, you're respectful. Even the Naren's little thing of, I've got just a couple of quick questions. It's saying, I respect your time is important. I'm not going to take too much of your time, right? It's all those little things like that are showing your awareness of interpersonal, of the situation, that you're respectful of other people, that you're a good listener, that you respond well, that you can build a rapport with people. And that means, obviously, that you're making good eye contact with them. A really great way to do that is to use their names right at the start.
Mm.
So if you've got 2 people or 3 people in the panel, make sure you say hello to each of them by name individually. And again, at least at the end of the interview, say thank you to each of them individually by name. It's just that one other way that you can build those sort of that connection. As Naren said at the start, they're looking for broadly speaking, 2 things, probably 3 things, I think, actually. One is, can you do the job? And number 2, will you fit into the team? Can they imagine having you as a colleague in the same office with them, or in the same, the building, like in the same department? Are you going to be someone who they can get on well with, who's going to bring the right sort of qualities to the team, right? I would say the third thing that they look for is actually, are you likely to stay in the role, right? So you might have great skills, you might be a lovely person, but if they really suspect that 3 months on the track, you're going to get a better offer and you're out of there, they're going to be reluctant to offer you the role. So you've got to do all, those questions about your career goals, and how long can you see yourself in the role? They might even ask you point blank. You've got to, and that came up in the chat as well, you've got to try to convince them that you're there for the long haul, right? But this thing about, how you present yourself is absolutely how they'll see you'll be if you join the team. So this is where having that practice, yes, you can get affected by nerves, but practicing with friends, practicing with family is going to help you sort of work your way, rehearse a way into a good performance.
Yeah. Also, I think it's good to be confident but humble at the same time. If you come in there and you've got guns blazing and you're talking about how you can do this and that, and that may not work for most companies. So I think you've got to approach it as more of a professional discussion, not just them firing questions at you and you giving stressful answers. I think you've just got to approach it in a calm and considered way and say, look, be confident in who you are and your abilities, and your experience, and you're there to support them. You're there to advance your career, but you're also there to build a career with that company as well. So try and treat that interview as an opportunity for you to share your experiences with them, and at the same time demonstrate how you can add value to what they're doing there.
Like one of the biggest issues the clients I have work with in terms of preparing for interviews is to actually just talk about themselves in this way. Look, I've done this. In this project, I did that, because everyone's been taught it's not good to sort of brag or just to sort of, talk about yourself too much. And so developing this confidence to actually not do it in a bragging way or in a sort of big noting yourself, but just to be able to quite clearly and objectively describe what you've been able to do, what your skills are, is something that most people actually need to practice with to feel comfortable with. And the more comfortable you can do that, the more confident you're going to come across. And confidence is probably the biggest thing in an interview. Anyone who comes across as lacking in confidence in an interview, it's very hard then for the interviewers to feel confidence in you. It's like, well, this person hasn't even got confidence in themselves. How can we feel confident they'll do the job? Whereas someone else who comes in and has this attitude of, oh, I know I can do this job. I know I've got the skills. I know I'd be really a great employee, a great member of this team. And that sort of comes through the way that they provide their answers. It's much easier then for the interviewers to feel that confidence in you.
Just some basic things at the end, guys. What do you wear? It sort of depends on the company and the role you're applying for. The safe bet for a gentleman is to wear like a suit and tie, but that doesn't always work. 2 quick examples is I've got a cousin of mine. He's a senior civil engineer, construction manager, and I caught up with him in the city, and he turned up in just some, you know, black navy sort of slacks, and like a flannelly sort of shirt, and just like a windbreaker jacket. And he goes, yeah, I've just got some work I'm doing here, and then I've got an interview. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, are you going to wear that? He goes, yeah, it's a construction site. You know, I'm not going in with a suit and tie. Same thing with the tech industry. You know, some companies, startups, you're not going to wear a suit and tie. If it's a laboratory type of thing, you may not wear a suit and tie. But again, you got to pick and choose what's the most appropriate thing. But sometimes that is a safe bet for women. Again, it's the same sort of thing. Make sure you get a feel for the culture. If it's really, really corporate, maybe you have to wear corporate style, long skirt, long pants, and a shirt and a jacket, or a nice jumper perhaps, and handbag, or whatever accessories you may want to bring. But certainly, yes, you got to look the part.
Okay, let's jump in there. So that's where we talked about before with visiting the place. So if it's, for example, at a particular university, in a particular department, you might just be able to wonder, or go and have a look and just see what other people are wearing there. Just get a sense of what's sort of the standard way that people dress, the level of formality that they're using.
Yep. When should you arrive? If your interview's at 2 p.m., so there's a couple of things. Always never, ever be late to an interview. If you're not sure on where it is, a couple of days before, go and scope it out. Catch the train in or bus, if that's your transport, or driving. Figure out where's their parking. If it's in the city, maybe the train's better. Or if you are driving in, where's the car park? How much is it? Imagine you've got a 2 p.m. interview and you drive to the parking lot in the city, and it's like $80 an hour. You might go, oh my God, I can't afford this. I've got to park somewhere else. So just be really mindful of that. If you are catching the train, always go I always leave a buffer of at least an hour, maybe 2 hours before the interview. Go to a cafe, have a cup of coffee, relax, get prepared. You should report into reception probably about 5 minutes, 7 minutes before the interview. Anything sooner than that is really a bit annoying. I think a lot of managers complain that, oh my God, they may have back-to-back meetings, and you turn up half an hour early, and then reception call, Jamie's here for his 3 p.m. interview, and it's like 2 p.m. So just be mindful of that. 5-10 minutes before is fine. Okay. Body language, eye contact, the tone of your voice, the speed, all of these are really important things. So try not to give monotone answers like this, so that if the interview panel asks me questions, I'm just talking like this the whole way through. Okay, they'll lose interest. Eye contact, try and give equal weighting to the different panel members as well, and use your hands. So don't just, I usually put my hands on the table like this. I don't put it on the lap. It looks like you're a bit nervous. So on the table is fine, like in that sort of way. And then certainly to explain your points, you can use your hands. If you're giving examples of 3 things you've done, you can say, look, the first thing I did was this, second thing, and the third thing. Okay. So these are all little elements that make up a good interview. And we've got a bit of a follow-up process here. Langdon, did you want to just explain this part?
Yeah, so to give you the best shot at getting a job offer, once you've done the interview, just send an email expressing, saying thank you, as it says there, just repeating how you're a good match for the role. Maybe mention some specific skills. Again, just emphasizing how you are a technical match for the role, and say, look, please get in touch if you've got any more questions. Just by going to that little extra effort, it's just one of the ways that you can stand out from the competition. So imagine if they interview 5 people, but 2 people send this follow-up email. Oh, look, it was great to meet you. Thank you again for your time. Those people just come across as far more professional and far more interested in the role than the ones who just sort of left it there at that point and didn't make any more contact. All right, so show them that you're really keen, show them that you want to engage and continue engaging by sending a thank you email. And I think the final slide is just basically says, keep on practicing. Yeah. So this is it's not enough to just think about your answers in your head. It's not enough to make a few notes on a bit of paper or in a Word document. As Naren said before, the really important thing to give you the best chance of performing well in the interview is to actually practice your answers out loud, not just even reading them off a screen or anything, but saying them. So get family members or friends to ask you some questions and give you some feedback. Practice maintaining that eye contact. That's what the mirror one's about, right? Can you stand in front of the mirror, maintain eye contact with yourself, and at the same time, remember your answer and go right through the structure, a quick introduction, my example, star, a bit of a conclusion. There's quite a bit going on there. But the more you do it, the more natural it will become for you to answer questions in that way. And therefore, the more confident you'll be, the more you'll be able to play with it a bit and really engage with the interviewers as you're giving your answers. Because if part of your mind is always, what am I going to say next? What do I do next? It's very hard to look confident, to look relaxed, and to keep eye contact because your brain's working so hard. So lots and lots of practice.
I think Jody's asked about, how soon or long should I wait to follow up? It's a pretty tricky one. Maybe 3 days is probably okay. So if you had an interview on a Friday, maybe you want to follow up on like a Tuesday or Wednesday, certainly not the next day, or 2 days is probably a bit too soon. A good sign that they're keen is if they ask you to supply references. That's a really good sign. So what I would always do after any interview I attend, I have 3 or 4 references already lined up. I'll give them a quick email or a call or an SMS and say, hey, I've just attended an interview for this. Just want to give you the heads up that you may be called as a reference. I'll call you if you are. If the company calls me and says, we would like your 3 references, the first thing I do is I contact the 3 that I'm thinking of, or 2, and I'll brief them on the interview and the company and the role. I even email them my resume. I email them a copy of the job ad, and I'll say, look, please have a quick look. Because the last thing you want to happen is they call up a reference to do a check and they ask, so when did Langdon actually work at Career Success Australia? And I say, oh God, I think it was 2017 to 2018, I think. And he was there like 2019 to 2020 or something. It's so super important to brief those references. So if I attend an interview, 90% of the focus of the interview is in customer support, and they call my reference and they say, so what did Darren do at Career Success? And they say, oh, look, he was more involved in web design and events management. And I've told them otherwise. There's inconsistencies there. All right. So the reference checking part is also something to keep an eye on. So I think that's probably it for today. Happy to take some questions. Alex, I think, is asking, should you keep in touch with your references? Alex, did you want to just explain that question? Should you keep in touch with your references? Of course, you should always keep in touch with former managers, supervisors, colleagues who can be lifelong references. And that's all part of relationship building and networking, guys. So by all means, you've got to keep in touch with them.
You sort of ask them how things are in the team and that sort of thing, or just...
Yeah, for sure. Because good references are hard to get. So when you have one, you've got to keep them. So as an example, I finished working at Swinburne University in 2009. And I still have maybe 2 or 3 senior people at Swinburne who I can call upon. We have, over the past 10 years, I may have seen them twice, but we're on LinkedIn, how are you doing? Oh, I noticed you shared that post. Just keeps that engagement going. All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Edwin. No worries. Jamie, are you implying that we shouldn't include references in the original job application? That's a good question. So there's a couple of things with that, Jamie. When you apply for some jobs, they ask you to put in your references, emails, names, numbers, position, full work, so you can't avoid it. If that is the case, you should still call them and say, hey, I'm applying for this job at Melbourne Uni. I'm just putting you down as a reference. Is that okay? The worst thing is someone calls them up and they have no idea that you've put them down as a reference. That's really bad. I don't think it's appropriate at this point to put in references in your resume. It's something that gets dealt with at the interview stage, so I wouldn't put them in. No. Unless it's, of course, someone like super duper important and who's going to, having them on the resume is basically going to guarantee you a job.
Or at least an open door, yeah, to an interview straight away.
Yeah. Time for one more question on interviews or anything for that matter on careers and employment. All right. Well, look, if there are any further questions, what I would suggest is feel free to connect with Langdon and myself on LinkedIn. If you think of anything, you know, later today or tomorrow, perhaps you have an interview coming up and you think, oh my goodness, how do I do this? Or what was that opening pitch slide again? Feel free to connect with us at the on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to give you some tips. If you don't ask, you tell you a bit about yourself in the. Yeah, it's a good question, Alex. So if they don't formally ask you, tell us about yourself. It's not easy to squeeze it in some other way. It depends on what they throw at you first. You've just got to handle it. Thanks, James. Glad you liked it. So, you know, sometimes they throw you curveballs. So they could say, look, thank you, Darren, for your application today. You know, what's brought you here? What made you apply? Okay. So again, you have to modify what made you apply. You can't say, well, you know, I've been out of work for 3 months and this thing came up and I had to go. You've got to craft your answer and say, look, you know, thank you for inviting me for today's interview. It's great to be here. Look, I think the reason why I applied was when I saw Deloitte advertising this role in the audit division. You know, I've worked at EY and I've got a passion for auditing and I've just done my external auditors course. Okay. Link it back to the job description. Use a phrase like this. Look, when I was reading through the JD, I was already drawn to it because of A, B, C, D.
Okay, this is the last one then. Eva, very quickly, we talked about this earlier. What if they ask about something you don't have experience in, right? So as Darren said before, the worst thing you can say is say, no, sorry, I'm out of that. I don't have any experience there. Next question, please, because that's pretty much a line through your name at that point, right? So as we mentioned before, try to think of something that is similar in some way that shows you've got the transferable skills to pick up that particular duty or use that particular bit of software or that to be able to perform that process. So something that relates. So you can start off by saying, well, I don't have any hands-on experience in A or whatever that thing is. However, and jump in very quickly with, however, I have done this other thing. And maybe go on to talk a little bit about that and describe how it's similar to the thing that they're talking about, right? So emphasizing those transferable skills between this other task you've done. Maybe it's some software that's similar in some way, or it's a project that's similar in some way. And then you can also emphasize that, you know, I'm a quick learner. When I was in such and such a role, I picked up the processes there within the first week. So I'm confident that I can very quickly get up to speed with that software or with that process, right? By doing everything you can to allay any concerns about your lack of experience, you're bridging that gap, right?
Yeah. It is tricky if they come at you and they say, you know, tell us about your experience in designing electromagnetic microchips for first generation satellites used in the Defense Force. I have no idea. Never done it. Okay. But what you have to do, there's a few things, guys. So if they ask you some complex question like, tell us about your experience designing microelectronic chips, da 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 da. You can say, so buy yourself some time and say, yeah, sure. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again? So you can always ask them, could you repeat the question again? But normally you can only ask that once in an interview. After every question, if you say, could you say that again? Could you repeat that again? It's not a good look. So you could say, look, could you repeat the question again? And then you could clarify the question and say, sorry, so just to double check, are you just asking if I've got experience in designing electromagnetic da-da-da for the Defense Force? And they'll say, yes, you know, we're looking to see if you have da-da-da-da-da. And then hopefully you can pick up a keyword that you've done something or you've studied before. That's all you're looking to do, is to pick something in the question that you've done something relatable, okay? Absolute worst case is to say, look, I haven't got much experience in designing microchips using PCB design for Defense Force, mainly because my experience has focused on A, B, C. Okay, mainly because my academic studies and my experience with BHP and Rio was mainly focused on mining infrastructure design and and logistics. So I haven't had an opportunity to get involved in designing however, that's the key word. You must use that word. However, based on my proven experience where I have picked up new technologies and systems pretty quickly, especially when I joined BHP, I had no idea. I wouldn't say I had no idea. I didn't have experience using but within 3 weeks. So if designing these electrical is important in this role, I'm very confident I can pick it up pretty quick. It's unlikely they're going to ask you something you don't know if you've really studied the PD and the company website and things like that.
And they have your resume as well. So hopefully they won't pull something out that is too outrageous.
Yeah, but just
it's gone 5 past. I think we should probably time to wrap up.
We'll wrap up now. But just lastly, just avoid saying no. Okay. Try and explain how you can bridge the gap. So look, thank you so much for being part of today's interview training workshop. Hopefully you've picked up some useful tips from it. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn if you've got some good feedback. Feel free to relay it back to SSA. Thanks, Jody, for hosting us, and all the best with your careers, everyone.